Don't drink that wine. The warning was barely louder than the string quartet playing beneath the crystal chandeliers, but Richard Whitmore heard it clearly. His hand stopped with the rim of the glass, less than an inch from his lips. Around him, 500 guests filled the Grand Marlowe Ballroom in Manhattan, their black tuxedos and jeweled gowns moving beneath warm gold light, their laughter blending with the soft clink of silverware and champagne flutes. Richard slowly lowered the glass. The voice had come from his left, from a young black server standing beside a marble column with an empty tray pressed against her waist. She looked no older than 19. Her name tag read Aaliyah Brooks. Richard stared at her, first with confusion, then irritation. Men like Richard Whitmore were not accustomed to being interrupted, especially at their own charity gala, and certainly not by someone the room had trained itself not to notice. "What did you say?" he asked. Aaliyah swallowed. She could feel hundreds of eyes beginning to shift toward her, drawn by the sudden silence spreading outward from Richard like a cold wind. "I said you shouldn't drink that, sir." Richard looked at the dark red wine in his glass. Nothing appeared unusual. The vintage had been selected personally by Victoria Hale, chairwoman of the Whitmore Children's Foundation, for a private toast scheduled before the announcement of a $200 million medical research fund. "And why is that?" Richard asked, his voice calm enough to make Aaliyah more nervous than anger would have. She glanced toward the service station across the ballroom. 10 minutes earlier, she had been arranging glasses when she noticed something small. One bottle carried a label that sat slightly higher than the others. The foil around its neck had a faint crease. Then, when she poured Richard's glass, a strange scent rose beneath the wine's usual notes. Most people would have missed it. Aaliyah had not. Before taking this temporary catering job, she had spent 3 semesters studying biochemistry at Columbia, memorizing reactions, compounds, and warning signs while working nights and caring for her mother. She knew enough to understand one dangerous truth. When something seems wrong, status does not make silence safer. "The bottle was tampered with," she said. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Richard's expression hardened. Across the room, Victoria Hale turned sharply. Tall, elegant, and dressed in silver, she crossed the polished floor with controlled steps. "Richard," she said with a thin smile, "surely we are not stopping the entire evening because a server has an imagination." A few guests laughed quietly. Aaliyah felt heat climb into her face, but she did not move. Richard looked from Victoria to the glass, then back to Aaliyah. "Do you have proof?" he asked. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the tray. "Not yet, sir." Victoria gave a soft, dismissive laugh. "Then I suggest you return to your job." The quartet had stopped playing. 500 people were watching now. Aaliyah could hear the ventilation system humming above the chandeliers and the faint pulse of her own heartbeat. Richard raised the glass again, studying the wine as light passed through it like dark ruby glass. Aaliyah knew this was the moment when sensible people stepped backward. She also knew she would never forgive herself if she did. She took one step forward. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice steady now, "you can fire me in 30 seconds. But first, please put that glass down." Aaliyah held Richard Whitmore's gaze, even as every instinct in her body told her to disappear into the service corridor and never return. For most of her life, disappearing had been useful. It kept strangers from asking questions she did not want to answer. It kept professors from noticing when she arrived exhausted after spending half the night in a hospital waiting room with her mother. It kept customers from seeing the textbooks hidden beneath the counter at the coffee shop, where she once worked from 5 in the morning until noon before crossing the city for afternoon classes. But standing beneath the chandeliers of the Grand Marlowe Ballroom, invisibility suddenly felt dangerous. Richard finally lowered the glass and placed it on the nearest table. The sound of its base touching polished wood was small, almost delicate, yet Aaliyah heard it as clearly as a bell. Victoria Hale's smile tightened. "There," she said. "The crisis has been avoided. Now perhaps everyone can return to the evening." The string quartet began playing again, uncertainly at first, and conversations slowly returned, but the attention of the room did not fully leave Aaliyah. She could feel it following her as a catering supervisor hurried toward her with a pale, furious expression. "Service hallway." "Now," he whispered. Aaliyah nodded. She did not argue. She walked past tables covered in white linen, past centerpieces filled with winter roses, and through a narrow door that separated the ballroom's golden warmth from the fluorescent light of the staff corridor. The difference was immediate. Out there, crystal and silk. Back here, stainless steel carts, rubber floor mats, humming refrigerators, and people moving quickly because wealthy guests disliked waiting. Aaliyah set her tray beside a stack of folded napkins and finally released the breath she had been holding. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them against the cool metal counter until they steadied. 3 months earlier, she had been sitting in a university laboratory, wearing safety glasses and studying organic compounds under bright white lights. Then her mother's kidney condition worsened. Medical appointments multiplied. Bills arrived in thick envelopes. Aaliyah told herself that leaving school was temporary, just 1 semester, perhaps 2. She took every shift she could find, including tonight's gala, because temporary work paid quickly and questions about unfinished degrees did not matter when someone needed 500 plates carried across a ballroom. She had not expected anyone here to know her name. She had certainly not expected to challenge Richard Whitmore. "What were you thinking?" the supervisor demanded as he entered behind her. "I noticed something wrong. You smelled wine." "I noticed the seal first." Aaliyah turned toward him. The bottle served to Mr. Whitmore had been opened before it reached our station. The label was misaligned, and the foil had been pressed back into place. The supervisor stared at her as though she were speaking another language. "You are here to serve drinks. I know why I am here." Her voice remained quiet. "That does not mean I should ignore what I see." Before he could answer, the service door opened. Victoria Hale stepped into the corridor, bringing with her a trace of expensive perfume and the cold authority of the ballroom. Her eyes settled on Aaliyah. "Miss Brooks," she said, reading the name tag slowly. "I think you and I need to have a conversation." Aaliyah looked past her. Through the narrow opening in the door, she could see Richard still standing beside the untouched glass, no longer speaking to his guests. He was staring down at the wine. And for the first time that evening, Victoria Hale looked nervous. Victoria Hale allowed the service door to close behind her, and the music from the ballroom became a distant vibration through the wall. Up close, Aaliyah could see that Victoria's calm expression required effort. The woman held a silver evening bag tightly against her side, and one finger tapped against its clasp in a slow, controlled rhythm. "You caused an unnecessary scene," Victoria said. "I warned someone about something I noticed. You embarrassed the host of this event in front of investors, donors, and members of the press." Aaliyah looked at her carefully. "If I am wrong, then I embarrassed myself. If I am right, then embarrassment is not the biggest problem in this building." The catering supervisor drew in a sharp breath. Victoria's eyes narrowed. For several seconds, the only sounds in the corridor were rolling cart wheels and the steady hum of an industrial refrigerator. "You are 19 years old," Victoria said. "You are working a temporary catering shift. Yet somehow you believe you understand a bottle of Bordeaux better than professionals who have spent decades selecting wine." Aaliyah felt the familiar weight behind those words. She had heard different versions of them in classrooms, stores, offices, and apartment lobbies. Sometimes people questioned whether she belonged. Sometimes they spoke slowly to her before discovering she understood more than they expected. Sometimes they looked at her uniform and decided they already knew the limits of her mind. She had learned that anger rarely changed those people. Precision sometimes did. "The bottle was stored at approximately 55 degrees, Aaliyah said. "The room is close to 72. Condensation formed lightly on every bottle brought from storage, except that one. Its glass was already warmer. Someone handled it before service." Victoria's tapping finger stopped. "That proves nothing." "No," Aaliyah replied. "But the damaged foil, the crooked label, and the unusual odor together are enough to justify testing it." The supervisor looked between them, suddenly less certain of his anger. Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You have no idea what kind of evening this is." "I know exactly what kind of evening it is. That is why I spoke." Beyond the door, applause suddenly rose from the ballroom. Richard was expected to announce the new research fund within minutes, followed by a ceremonial signing with several major donors. Aaliyah had read the event schedule during the staff briefing. Every camera in the room would be facing him. Victoria glanced toward the sound, then back at Aaliyah. "Go home," she said. "Your agency will receive payment for the full shift. Consider that generosity." Aaliyah did not move. "What happens to the glass?" It gets washed, like every other glass. Then I am staying. Victoria's expression changed. Only slightly, but Aaliyah saw it. Not anger. Calculation. The door opened again before either woman could speak. Richard Whitmore stood on the other side, his broad shoulders framed by the warm ballroom light. He was no longer holding the wine. Behind him stood Daniel Mercer, his chief of security, carrying a clear evidence bag containing the untouched glass. Richard looked first at Victoria, then at Aaliyah. "The announcement has been delayed," he said. Victoria recovered immediately. "Richard, this is becoming absurd." "Perhaps." His voice was quiet. "But I built my company by checking details other people called absurd." He turned to Aaliyah. "Miss Brooks, you said the bottle was different from the others. Show me." They returned to the ballroom together. Conversations faded as Richard crossed the room with a temporary server walking beside him. Aaliyah could feel the judgment in every glance, but she kept her eyes on the service station. When they reached it, she stopped. The bottle was gone. 9 bottles remained in the silver cooler, but the one with the crooked label had disappeared. Richard studied the empty space. "Where is it?" he asked. No one answered. Aaliyah looked across the ballroom and saw a catering cart rolling toward the freight elevator nearly 100 feet away. On its lower shelf, beneath a folded white cloth, the neck of a wine bottle caught the chandelier light. "There," she said. And this time, Richard moved before anyone could tell him she was imagining things. Richard crossed the ballroom with Daniel Mercer beside him, and Aaliyah followed several steps behind. The catering cart had almost reached the freight elevator when Richard called out, "Stop that cart." The young employee pushing it froze and turned, his face pale with confusion. "Sir." Daniel approached calmly and lifted the folded white cloth from the lower shelf. Beneath it sat a single bottle of Bordeaux. The room seemed to contract around that small piece of dark glass. Richard looked at the employee. "Who told you to remove this?" The young man shook his head quickly. "I do not know, sir. A woman from event management said the bottle was empty and needed to go downstairs." "Was it empty?" Daniel asked. "I did not check." Richard glanced at Aaliyah. She stepped closer but did not touch the bottle. Under the chandelier light, the details were easier to see now. The foil around the neck had a thin line where it had been lifted and pressed down again. The paper label was slightly raised along one edge. Aaliyah pointed without making contact. "That is the bottle." Victoria appeared behind them, her expression composed again. "Richard, you have 500 guests waiting for an announcement. Are you really going to turn a charity gala into an investigation because a temporary server noticed a wrinkle in a label?" Richard did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on the bottle. "Daniel, secure it." Victoria gave a quiet sigh. "This is humiliating." Aaliyah looked at her. "For whom?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Several nearby guests heard. A low murmur spread through the crowd. Victoria turned slowly toward Aaliyah. "You have already done enough. I have not done anything except tell the truth about what I saw." "You do not know the truth." "Then testing the bottle will prove that." Victoria's face remained still, but the muscles near her jaw tightened. Richard noticed. So did Aaliyah. Daniel placed the bottle inside a clear protective container and handed it to another security officer. "Take this to the hotel medical suite," Richard said. "Call Dr. Levin. Tell him I want an immediate screening and preserve everything." The officer left through the service corridor. The ballroom was almost silent now. Aaliyah became aware of how out of place she looked among the guests. Her black service uniform was plain. Her shoes had been purchased on sale and already showed wear along the edges. Around her stood people whose watches cost more than her mother's yearly rent. She felt their eyes moving over her, measuring her, asking the same silent question Victoria had asked aloud. Who did she think she was? Richard turned toward the stage, then stopped. "The announcement can wait 15 minutes. A board member approached him nervously. "Richard, the press schedule is fixed. The market statement is prepared for release at 9. Then release it at 9:15. The donors will ask questions. Let them." Richard's tone ended the discussion. Aaliyah watched him return his attention to the empty space in the wine cooler. Something about the arrangement bothered her. 9 bottles remained, but the serving list she had received at the beginning of the shift showed 12 bottles assigned to the private toast. One had been secured. That left 2 unaccounted for. She looked toward the tables. Hundreds of glasses reflected the chandeliers. Some were water. Some were champagne. Some held the same dark red wine. Her stomach tightened. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Richard turned. There were 12 bottles on the service sheet. Daniel immediately understood. How many were opened? The catering supervisor stepped forward, checking a clipboard with shaking hands. 3 for the private table. 9 for general service. Aaliyah looked toward Richard's table. 3 seats had been reserved for the ceremonial signing. Richard Whitmore, Senator Thomas Reed, and Dr. Evelyn Grant, director of the Medical Foundation, receiving the $200 million fund. Richard followed Aaliyah's gaze. "Find the other 2 bottles," he said. Daniel began issuing quiet instructions to his team. Victoria stepped backward. Just one step. Aaliyah saw it. Then the ballroom lights dimmed automatically as the event program moved to its scheduled presentation. A large screen above the stage came alive with the Whitmore Foundation logo, and a recorded voice welcomed the guests to the evening's most important announcement. In the darkness, Aaliyah turned toward the side exit. Victoria Hale was gone. Aaliyah stared at the empty space where Victoria had been standing only seconds earlier. The ballroom screen continued playing its polished presentation, showing smiling children, new hospital wings, and numbers describing how many families the Whitmore Foundation hoped to help. The applause that followed sounded distant to her. She turned toward Richard. She left. Richard's eyes moved immediately toward the side exit. Daniel was already speaking into his radio. "Cover the hotel exits. Keep it quiet. No alarms, no disruption." Richard looked at Aaliyah. "Stay here." She almost laughed at the irony. Less than 20 minutes ago, people had wanted her removed for speaking. Now the most powerful man in the room was ordering security to protect the place where she stood. But Aaliyah shook her head. "The other bottles may still be in service areas. My team will find them. Your team does not know what they are looking for." Richard studied her for a moment, then nodded once. Daniel assigned a security officer to accompany them, and the 3 moved through the service door into the bright corridor behind the ballroom. Aaliyah checked the first preparation station. Nothing. The second held empty champagne bottles and unopened sparkling water. At the third, she found a cardboard wine case beneath a stainless steel table. 11 spaces were empty. 1 bottle remained. She crouched beside it. The foil was smooth. The label was straight. "This one looks normal," she said. Richard stood behind her, silent. "Then where are the other 2?" he asked. A catering employee nearby looked up from arranging dessert plates. 2 bottles went to the private reception room on the 32nd floor. Richard's face changed. "Who authorized that?" "Miss Hale, sir." She said Senator Reed and Dr. Grant wanted a private toast before the announcement. Richard pulled out his phone. He called Senator Reed first. No answer. Then Dr. Grant. Still no answer. Daniel immediately directed security toward the elevators. Aaliyah felt cold despite the heat from the kitchen. They moved quickly through the corridor, but before reaching the elevator bank, the catering supervisor stepped in front of Aaliyah. "You are done," he said. "Your agency called. Your assignment has been terminated." Richard stopped. "On whose authority?" The supervisor looked uncomfortable. "Event management, sir." "Which person in event management?" Silence. Aaliyah already knew. She removed her name tag slowly and placed it on the supervisor's clipboard. "It is fine." Richard looked at her. "No, it is not. I need this job, Mr. Whitmore. But right now there are 2 people upstairs who may need something more important." She walked past the supervisor toward the elevator. Richard followed. The doors opened with a soft chime, and they entered. As the elevator rose, no one spoke. Floor numbers glowed one after another. 28, 29, 30. Aaliyah watched her reflection in the mirrored wall. She looked tired, small, completely ordinary. She thought about her mother asleep in their apartment in Queens, probably believing her daughter was spending the evening carrying trays and collecting a paycheck. She thought about how easy it would have been to stay silent. The doors opened on the 32nd floor. The private reception room stood at the end of a quiet hallway. Richard reached it first and opened the door. Senator Reed and Dr. Grant were inside, standing near a window overlooking Manhattan. On the table between them were 2 glasses of untouched red wine. "Richard," Dr. Grant asked, "what is going on?" Richard exhaled slowly. "Nobody touches those glasses." Senator Reed frowned. "Victoria told us this was your private selection." Aaliyah approached the table carefully. She leaned close enough to examine the glasses without touching them. The same faint, unusual scent reached her. Her heart sank. "These came from the missing bottles," she said. Senator Reed looked at her uniform, then at Richard. "Who is she?" Richard answered without hesitation. "The reason none of us are drinking tonight." At that moment, Daniel's radio sounded. The first screening result had arrived. He listened, his expression becoming still. Then he looked at Richard. The wine was altered. The room fell silent. Richard turned toward the window, where the city lights stretched for miles beneath them. When he faced Aaliyah again, there was no doubt left in his eyes. Only one question. How much of this gala was Victoria controlling? Aaliyah looked at the two glasses, then toward the folder waiting beside Dr. Grant's chair. The ceremonial agreement was already open to the signature page. "Maybe," she said quietly. This was never only about the wine. The agreement lay open beneath a brass reading lamp, its pages held flat by two crystal paperweights. Aaliyah stood several feet away, looking at the signature lines while the city glowed beyond the windows. Richard Whitmore, Senator Thomas Reed, and Dr. Evelyn Grant. 3 names. 3 signatures expected before the night was over. She felt the pieces moving in her mind, not yet forming a complete picture, but no longer appearing random. The private wine, the scheduled toast, the agreement waiting upstairs instead of on the ballroom stage. Victoria's urgency, her attempt to send Aaliyah home. "May I see the agreement?" Aaliyah asked. Senator Reed frowned. "This is a confidential document." Richard looked at him. Tonight, confidentiality nearly became the least of our concerns. Dr. Grant closed the folder before Aaliyah could approach. "Richard," she identified a suspicious bottle. "That does not make her legal counsel." Aaliyah felt the words land with familiar weight. Again, the uniform. Again, the assumption that one role erased every other part of her life. She stepped back. "You are right, Dr. Grant. I am not legal counsel." She looked toward the 2 untouched glasses. "But I also was not hired to inspect wine bottles." Silence settled over the room. Richard walked to the table and opened the agreement himself. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Aaliyah hesitated. "I am thinking that if someone wanted 3 important people confused, sick, or unable to think clearly during a signing, the document might matter as much as the drinks." Senator Reed looked offended. "This agreement has been reviewed for months." "By whom?" Aaliyah asked. Dr. Grant answered. "Multiple legal teams." "And who coordinated the final version?" No one spoke. Richard's eyes slowly moved toward the folder. "Victoria." Daniel Mercer entered the room carrying a tablet. "Security has not found her. Her car is still downstairs, but she is not in the ballroom or lobby." Richard took the tablet. "Camera footage?" "We are reviewing it now." Aaliyah moved toward the window. Far below, Manhattan traffic flowed through wet streets, headlights stretching across the pavement like ribbons of white and red. For the first time since she had spoken in the ballroom, there was nothing she could do. The quiet reached her all at once. Her shoulders lowered. Her hands began trembling again. She folded them together and watched her breath form a faint cloud against the cold window glass. Richard noticed. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "You do not look all right." Aaliyah gave a tired smile. "I was fired 15 minutes ago. My mother thinks I am working until midnight. I have $42 in my checking account, and I just accused the chairwoman of a major foundation of arranging something I still cannot prove." Richard looked down. For a man whose name covered buildings, companies, and charitable institutions, $42 seemed to silence him more effectively than any speech. "Why did you leave Columbia?" he asked. Aaliyah turned toward him. "My mother needed help. You could have asked for financial assistance." She almost smiled again. "People say that as if assistance is a door with a large sign over it. Most of the time, it is a maze, and the rent is still due while you are trying to find the exit." Richard had no answer. The room became quiet again. Not the tense silence of the ballroom, but something softer. Human. The air conditioner hummed. Rain touched the windows in tiny silver lines. Then Daniel's tablet made a quiet sound. He looked down at the screen. "I found something." Everyone turned. Daniel placed the tablet on the table and played security footage from 3 hours earlier. Victoria stood in a private office with a man wearing a hotel maintenance uniform. She handed him 2 wine bottles. Then she gave him a small envelope. Richard leaned closer. "Who is he?" Daniel enlarged the image. "He does not work for the hotel." The footage continued. Victoria opened her evening bag and removed a flash drive. She connected it to a laptop. A document appeared on the screen. Aaliyah stared at the page, then at the agreement on the table. Pause it. Daniel stopped the video. Aaliyah pointed to the footer visible on the screen. That version number is different. Richard looked at the printed agreement. The footer read Final Version 12. The screen showed Final Version 13. Richard's face became still. Somewhere between the ballroom and the 32nd floor, someone had changed more than the wine. Richard stared at the two version numbers until the difference between them seemed to fill the entire room. Final Version 12 sat on the table beneath his hand. Final Version 13 glowed on Daniel's screen. One number apart. One invisible change away from disaster. "Give me Version 13, Richard said. Daniel was already working. Dr. Grant stepped closer to the tablet. The Foundation system should have an archived copy. Unless someone deleted it, Senator Reed said. Daniel made a call to Richard's legal department and requested every draft associated with the agreement. While they waited, Aaliyah studied the printed document. She did not understand every legal phrase, but she understood structure. In science, a tiny change in concentration could transform an entire reaction. In contracts, she suspected a few carefully placed words could do the same. Richard watched her turning pages. "What are you looking for?" "Something that benefits from confusion." "That is not very specific." Neither was the smell and the wine at first. Richard said nothing after that. 5 minutes later, Daniel received an encrypted file from Whitmore Global's legal archive. He opened Version 13 beside Version 12 and activated Document Comparison. Most pages remained white. Then red marks appeared across page 47. Dr. Grant leaned forward. "What is that section?" Richard read silently, and the color slowly left his face. The revised language transferred emergency control of the $200 million research fund to an independent management organization if any founding signatory became temporarily unable to perform official duties within 72 hours of execution. Senator Reed looked up sharply. "Which organization?" Daniel scrolled down. The name appeared near the bottom of the page. Hale Strategic Trust. No one spoke. Rain moved softly against the windows. Aaliyah looked from the screen to the two wine glasses. The plan was suddenly visible. It did not require dramatic chaos. It required signatures, confusion, and a carefully written clause waiting quietly inside a document almost no one expected to change. Richard sat down. For the first time that evening, he looked older than the photographs printed in business magazines. "I trusted her for 12 years, he said. Dr. Grant lowered her eyes. Senator Reed removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Aaliyah remained standing near the window. She understood betrayal differently. Hers had usually come in smaller forms. A landlord who promised extra time and changed his mind. An employer who praised her work but promoted someone else. A professor who suggested she reduce her course load because students from difficult backgrounds often struggled with advanced science. Richard's betrayal carried more zeros, but the silence afterwards sounded the same. Daniel's radio came alive. "We found Miss Hale." Richard stood. "Where?" "Still inside the hotel. 29th floor conference suite." "Is she alone?" Daniel listened. "No. She is with Martin Keller." Richard froze. "My chief financial officer?" Daniel nodded. The room shifted again. Victoria was not acting alone. Richard walked toward the door, but Aaliyah spoke before he reached it. "Wait." Everyone looked at her. "If they know you found the altered wine, they will destroy whatever is left." Daniel replied. "My team can secure the room." "Maybe. But what if the document is only one part?" Aaliyah looked at the gala schedule lying beside the agreement. The announcement had been delayed, but the press release was still scheduled for 9:15. She checked the clock. 9:12. What happens when that statement goes public? Richard's eyes narrowed. He picked up his phone and called his communications director. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. Daniel checked his tablet, then looked up. The press release was changed 7 minutes ago. Richard held out his hand. Daniel passed him the screen. The revised statement falsely announced Richard's immediate medical leave and temporary transfer of Foundation authority. The release was scheduled to publish automatically in less than 3 minutes. Richard stared at the countdown. 2 minutes and 41 seconds. Daniel began typing quickly, but his access request failed. The communications account has been locked. Richard turned toward Aaliyah. Hours earlier, she had been carrying a tray no one noticed. Now every person in the room was waiting for her to speak. She looked at the screen, then at the ballroom floor plan displayed beside it. "Do not chase Victoria yet," she said. "Go downstairs." Richard frowned. "Why?" Aaliyah pointed toward the media control booth marked behind the main stage. "Because if someone changed the release from inside this hotel, the fastest way to expose them is to let them think their plan is still working." Richard looked at the countdown on Daniel's tablet. 2 minutes and 23 seconds remained. "Explain," he said. Aaliyah pointed toward the ballroom floor plan. "Victoria expects you to be upstairs, dealing with the wine. Martin Keller expects the false statement to publish while everyone is confused. If you appear on that stage before the release goes live, their story collapses before they can control it." Daniel looked at Richard. "She's right. We can mirror the media booth feed and preserve every login attempt." Richard made his decision immediately. "Do it." They moved toward the elevators. Dr. Grant and Senator Reed remained upstairs with security while Richard, Daniel, and Aaliyah descended to the ballroom level. The elevator numbers fell slowly. 31, 30, 29. Aaliyah could hear her heartbeat between each soft chime. Richard stood beside her without speaking. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." Aaliyah looked at him. "For what?" "For asking whether you had proof before asking why you were afraid." She studied his face. There was no audience in the elevator, no microphone, no advantage in saying it. That made the apology feel different. "You did put the glass down," she said. "Eventually." The corner of Richard's mouth moved slightly, but the elevator doors opened before either of them spoke again. The ballroom was restless. 500 guests sat beneath dimmed chandeliers while reporters checked their phones and board members whispered near the stage. A large digital clock above the media booth showed 9:14. Daniel disappeared into the control corridor with 2 members of his team. Richard walked toward the stage. Aaliyah stopped near the service door. This was his world again. Her part, she thought, was over. Then Richard turned. "Come with me." Aaliyah shook her head. "Sir, I am wearing a catering uniform." That uniform noticed what 500 expensive suits did not. The words carried farther than he intended. Several guests turned. Richard continued toward the stage, and after a moment, Aaliyah followed. At 9:14 and 58 seconds, Richard stepped behind the podium. The scheduled presentation music stopped. Cameras lifted. Phones rose across the ballroom. Richard looked directly toward the media booth. "Good evening," he said. "Some of you may receive a statement in the next few moments, claiming that I am stepping away from my responsibilities for medical reasons. That statement is false." A wave of confusion passed through the room. Reporters began typing. Richard continued. "Tonight, an attempt was made to manipulate this foundation, its leadership, and a $200 million commitment intended for children's medical research." The ballroom became completely still. Behind the stage, Daniel's team captured the outgoing release and traced the active account controlling it. His voice came quietly through Richard's earpiece. "Confirmed. Keller's credentials. Originating from the 29th floor conference suite." Richard paused. Then the side doors opened. Victoria Hale entered with Martin Keller several steps behind her, both accompanied by hotel security and Daniel's investigators. Victoria stopped when she saw Richard on stage. Her face lost its practiced calm. Richard did not raise his voice. "Miss Hale, Mr. Keller, please remain where you are." Hundreds of people turned toward them. Aaliyah stood several feet behind Richard, suddenly aware of the same eyes that had judged her less than an hour earlier. But the room felt different now. No laughter. No whispers about a server imagining things. Only attention. Daniel stepped onto the stage and handed Richard a folder containing the comparison between the 2 contract versions, the security footage, and the digital access records. Richard looked at Victoria. "You changed the agreement. You arranged the false announcement. You attempted to transfer control of the foundation." Victoria's eyes moved toward Aaliyah. "You are trusting a 19-year-old waitress over someone who stood beside you for 12 years. Richard followed her gaze. "No," he said. "I am trusting evidence. She simply had the courage to make me look at it." The words settled over the ballroom. Victoria looked away. Richard turned toward Aaliyah. "Miss Brooks, I dismissed your warning because I saw your uniform before I saw your judgment. For that, I am sorry." Aaliyah felt her throat tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "Then remember the next person wearing one." Richard nodded slowly. There was nothing more powerful he could have said. He stepped away from the podium and offered Aaliyah the center of the stage, but she gently shook her head. She had never wanted applause. She had only wanted one man to put down one glass. As security escorted Victoria and Martin from the ballroom for questioning, Richard looked at the untouched wine glass still preserved inside its clear evidence bag. Then he looked at Aaliyah. "Your job was terminated tonight," he said. "Yes, sir." "Then tomorrow morning, I would like to discuss another one." Aaliyah looked toward the chandeliers, their warm light reflecting across 500 silent faces. "Tomorrow," she said quietly. "Tonight, finish what the children came here for." Richard looked at her for a long moment, then returned to the podium and announced that the Medical Research Fund would proceed under independent review and full public transparency. This time, when the room rose, Aaliyah remained still. The applause continued for nearly a minute, but Aaliyah heard it as if she were standing underwater. She remained near the edge of the stage while Richard spoke about independent oversight, public accountability, and the children whose futures mattered more than the reputations of anyone in the room. The chandeliers burned warmly above 500 guests, yet Aaliyah's attention drifted toward the service corridor, where stainless steel carts waited beneath fluorescent lights and unfinished trays of dessert sat untouched. Less than an hour earlier, she had entered that corridor believing she was about to lose a temporary job. Now reporters were asking for her name. She gave it once, quietly, then stepped away before the questions could multiply. Daniel Mercer met her near the ballroom doors. "Your coat is downstairs," he said. "I can have a car take you home." Aaliyah shook her head. "The subway still runs." Daniel almost argued, then seemed to understand that she needed something ordinary after an evening that had become anything but ordinary. He nodded and handed her the coat himself. Outside the hotel, the rain had stopped. Manhattan shone beneath streetlights, the sidewalks dark and reflective, the summer air cooler than it had been when she arrived. Aaliyah walked half a block before hearing footsteps behind her. Richard Whitmore approached without his jacket, his tie loosened, looking less like the man whose photograph appeared on magazine covers, and more like someone who had finally realized how close trust could stand to blindness. "Miss Brooks." She turned. "Sir." He held out her name tag. She had left it on the catering supervisor's clipboard. The small white card looked almost ridiculous in his hand after everything that had happened. "I thought you might want this." Aaliyah took it. "I'm not sure the agency will want it back." Richard looked toward the traffic moving along the avenue. "The agency manager called me 10 minutes ago. He apologized." "To you?" Richard understood the question immediately. His expression changed. "Yes." Aaliyah placed the name tag in her coat pocket. "Then he apologized to the wrong person." Richard was silent for a moment. "I will make sure he understands that. You do not have to fix everything tonight. I am beginning to realize that." They stood beneath the hotel awning as water dripped steadily from its edge. Richard reached into his pocket and handed her a business card. "Tomorrow, 10 in the morning. My office." Aaliyah looked at it, but did not take it immediately. "What kind of job?" "I do not know yet." She raised an eyebrow. "That is not a very convincing offer." For the first time that evening, Richard laughed softly. "Fair point. A paid internship with the Foundation's research oversight team. Full tuition support if you return to school, and a schedule that allows you to care for your mother." Aaliyah stared at him. The city seemed to grow quieter around her. "You decided all that in 10 minutes. "No. I decided you deserved an opportunity in the first minute. The other 9 were spent making sure I was offering something useful instead of something that only made me feel generous." Aaliyah finally took the card. "I will think about it." Richard nodded. He did not seem disappointed. "That is more than fair." The next morning, sunlight entered the small apartment in Queens through thin curtains and fell across the kitchen table. Aaliyah's mother sat with both hands around a cup of coffee while Aaliyah told her the story from beginning to end. At first, her mother thought she was joking. Then she saw the business card. She read it twice and placed it carefully on the table. "Are you going?" she asked. Aaliyah looked at the clock. 9:12. "I think so." Her mother smiled. "Then you should leave now. Rich people may forgive many things, but I hear they hate waiting." Aaliyah laughed, kissed her mother on the forehead, and left the apartment. At 9:58, she stepped into the lobby of Whitmore Global wearing the same shoes she had worn at the gala. The receptionist looked up. For one brief second, Aaliyah saw the familiar question in the woman's eyes. Then Richard emerged from the elevator himself. He crossed the marble floor and extended his hand. This time, there were no chandeliers, no cameras, and no applause. Only morning light through tall windows and two people standing on equal ground. Aaliyah shook his hand. Behind them, a custodian pushed a cart across the lobby. Richard moved aside to give him room and said, "Good morning." The custodian looked surprised, then smiled. Aaliyah noticed. She said nothing. Outside, the city moved through another ordinary morning, unaware of how much could change when one ignored voice was finally heard. Richard and Aaliyah entered the elevator. The doors closed softly, and the small white name tag remained in her pocket, no longer a symbol of where the world had placed her, but a reminder that dignity had been hers before anyone powerful learned to recognize it.